Halloween had always been my favourite time of year. There's something magical about the crisp autumn air, the scent of falling leaves, and the anticipation of venturing out into the night, costumed and ready for adventure. This Halloween, however, was different. It was a night I'd never forget, a night that would forever change the way I viewed the holiday. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I donned my meticulously crafted costume, a sinister hooded figure with a mask that concealed my face entirely. It was a costume I'd spent weeks perfecting, and I was proud of the air of mystery it exuded. Armed with an empty pillowcase, I set out my friends into the dimly lit neighbourhood. We began our quest for candy, eagerly knocking on doors and shouting trick or treat. The neighbours greeted us with smiles and buckets of treats, and we moved from house to house, relishing the joys of the Halloween tradition. But as we ventured deeper into the neighbourhood, the houses grew sparser, and the streetlights dimmer. The wind rustled, and the leaves in the trees overhead created eerie shadows that danced along the pavement. The sense of unease began to creep over me, like a chill down my spine. We approached a house that stood alone, its lawn overgrown and its porch sagging with neglect. It was a house that had always been rumoured to be haunted, and no one dared approach it on Halloween night. But I couldn't resist the lure of the unknown, and against my friend's warnings I ventured up to the door. The wood groaned as I knocked, and I heard the sound of distant shuffling from within. My heart raced, as the door creaked open, revealing a figure in a dimly lit doorway. The man who stood before me was hunched and frail, his eyes hidden behind thick glasses. He greeted me with a thin smile, his voice quivering. "Trick or treat, young one," he whispered, his frail hand extending, a wrinkled bag filled with candy. I hesitated for a moment, the aura of the house and the man unsettling me. But the allure of the unknown, the thrill of facing my fears overcame my hesitation, and I reached for the candy. But as my hand entered the bag, the man's grip tightened, his bony fingers digging into my palm. "Be careful what you wish for," he whispered, his voice filled with a haunting warning. I yanked my hand away, stumbled back, and the door slammed shut with a resounding thud. My heart raced as I rejoined my friends who had watched the strange encounter from a distance, as I told them what the man had said. They laughed, brushing it off as a Halloween prank from the old man. But that was not just a playful Halloween prank in my mind. We continued our quest for candy, but my unease lingered as we approached another house. I couldn't help but notice the decorations that adorned the porch. It was a collection of grotesque masks, all leering and twisted, which just added to my unease. My friends didn't seem to notice, but since leaving the old man's house, a sensation of being watched had come over me. As we left the latest house behind, my unease was growing by the minute. The eerie decorations and the frail man's unsettling words all seemed to hang over me like a heavy fog. My friends didn't seem to notice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was amiss on this Halloween night. As we walked down the dimly lit street, the distant laughter of trick-or-treaters echoed in the night. As our footsteps quickened and our nervous chatter grew more hushed, I glanced back, feeling a peculiar sensation that someone was following us. And that's when I saw it, or rather him. A masked clown stood at the end of the street, his grotesque makeup gleaming in the faint moonlight. He was dressed in a tattered bloodstained costume, a serrated knife clutched in one gloved hand. His clown eyes locked onto us, and his malicious grin sent chills down my spine. "Run!" I shouted to my friends, and we sprinted down the empty street. Our laughter and candy filled pillowcases forgotten. The clown pursued us, his footsteps echoing ominously. We darted down alleyways and side streets, but he remained hot on our heels. The Halloween decorations and eerie encounters now paled in comparison to the very real threat we faced. The clown was relentless, his laughter and haunting soundtrack to our frantic escape. Our breaths came in ragged gasps as we ran, our hearts racing in fear. Finally, we reached the safety of a well-lit street filled with other costumed revellers. The clown, for reasons known only to him, halted at the end of the darkness, his malevolent gaze locked onto us, as he raised his knife, his painted smile undeterred, before turning and disappearing into the night. another Halloween prank I snapped as I shoved one of my friends. Either way, none of us wanted to know what might have happened if we hadn't outrun that clown. We stood there panting and trembling, our Halloween adventure taking a nightmarish turn we could never have anticipated. It was a Halloween we could never forget, one that had turned from a night of magic and candy into a chilling encounter with a clown. It was Halloween night and my parents had left me alone for the night to go out with friends, leaving me to fend for myself. Our street was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and our well-kept houses were known for their vibrant Halloween decorations. In the weeks leading up to the holidays, families had turned their front yards into spooky graveyards, adorned their porches with cobwebs, and hung glowing jack-o'-lanterns from every tree. All the houses in my neighbourhood stood in close proximity of each other, their welcoming facades now transformed into eerie spectacles. In our neighbourhood, trick-or-treaters flocked from all around, drawn to the elaborate displays and generous candy givers. It was a place that thrived on community spirit, a place where Halloween was celebrated. But on this Halloween night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the neighbourhood transformed into a playground of the supernatural, I found myself alone in our home. The houses around us were silent, their lights extinguished as families joined the festivities. It was the first time I had ever been left alone during Halloween night, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as the streets fell into a silence that was broken only by the occasional gust of wind or the distant laughter of other trick-or-treaters, which reminded me to have candy at the ready by the door for the trick-or-treaters that night. I decided to embrace my newfound freedom by treating myself to a Halloween movie marathon to pass the time. Our living room was decked out with spooky decorations, and the glow of the TV illuminated the eerie ambience. As the night wore on, I also indulged in trick-or-treaters' candy I left by the door, making regular back and forth trips through the evening. The eerie atmosphere and sudden jump scares in the movie sent shivers down my spine. The occasional sound of wind rattling the windows or creaking of the house added to the overall eerie ambience of the night. Midnight came, and the trick-or-treaters seemed to be done for the night, so I decided to venture out for some late-night candy leftovers. The glow of the TV illuminated the room as I went to grab a few handfuls of treats. But as I headed to the front door, I noticed something strange, unmistakable. Muddy boot prints on the hardwood floor, leading from the front door into the house. My heart skipped a beat, and my mind raced. There was no way I had missed this when I went to get my candy earlier. The front door was locked, and I had been alone all night. Dread overran me as I froze to the spot, my eyes following the footprints into the house. I composed myself and silently ran to flick on all the light switches in the hallway. I returned to the living room, squeezing myself down beside the couch in an attempt to try and hide. Panic began to well up within me as I considered the possibilities that someone had entered the house in my parents' absence. My heart raced, and I realised I needed to call the police. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911 and reported the strange intrusion. The operator assured me that an officer would be dispatched to check things out. I sat there, waiting, my eyes fixed on the front door, my imagination conjuring all sorts of frightening scenarios. As I waited, I began to hear faint, distant noises, like muffled footsteps coming from the upstairs. The unease in my chest turned into a full-blown dread. It wasn't the wind, it was something more sinister. I clutched my phone tightly, my voice catching in my throat as I whispered, "Is anyone there?" thinking that would be a good idea at the time. The noises stopped abruptly. The only sound was my anxious beating in my heart. Seconds felt like hours as I strained my ears to hear any sign of movement. Then the silence was shattered by a sudden loud crash from above. My heart raced, and I knew I had to escape. I didn't dare go upstairs. Instead, I scrambled for the front door, fumbling with the lock before bursting out. Gasping for breath, I dialed the police again, telling them that I believed someone was in the house. Within minutes, sirens blared in the distance, and the flashing lights of the police cars illuminated the dark, empty street. 2 officers quickly approached the house, guns drawn, and with trembling hands, I led them inside. They searched every room, guns at the ready, but found no one. There was no sign of an intruder, and no explanation for the muddy boot prints. They assured me that it was safe, and they would keep an eye on the house for the rest of the night. There were no signs of forced entry, or boot prints leading away from the house. The muddy boot prints to this day still remain a mystery. The night was dark and the moon a faint crescent in the sky as I drove to a Halloween party with my friend Mark. Our excitement filled the car, our costumes ready for a night of festivities. I was a wicked witch and Mark a devilish vampire. We were both buzzing with anticipation, our laughter and banter filling the car. The looming trees and the chilling wind outside added to the atmosphere of Halloween. The anticipation of the party kept our spirits high, but it was the unexpected that slowly began to cast a shadow over the night. A few miles into our journey, I noticed her, a woman by the side of the road, her dress billowing in the wind, and her presence overwhelming me with unease. I never thought I could get such a feeling of unease from a Halloween costume. I pointed her out to Mark, who said she put my witch costume to shame. If Mark was trying to flirt with me, he had gone about it the wrong way. I was annoyed that he had ripped on my Halloween costume, and as he tried to make small talk, I simply sat in silence for the next few miles, just focusing on the road ahead. But that was when we saw her again. The woman in white, we saw her in the costume a few miles back. It couldn't be, I told myself. My heart pounded in my chest as I gazed at the woman in white through the car window. Mark and I exchanged nervous glances, both of us doubting our sanity. How could it be the same person we'd seen a few miles back? It had to be a coincidence, we told ourselves. Just a very similar Halloween costume. We continued to drive, but the unease settled in, like a storm cloud threatening to burst. The winding road seemed to stretch on forever, and the forest pressed in around us, closing off our escape, and then it happened again. The woman in white materialized like a thick fog right in front of us, her ghostly figure illuminated by our car headlights. Her pale eyes locked onto us. Panic seized me, and I slammed the brakes and swerved to the side of the road, bringing the car to a screeching halt. My heart raced as I turned to Mark, who wore an expression of sheer terror. Did we hit her? I don't think so, I replied. We sat for a few moments, trying to gather the courage to get out of the car. As we got out of the car, our surroundings were eerie and unsettling. The forest around us was cloaked in an oppressive silence. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl felt like an ominous whisper in the night. We searched the road, the surrounding woods, and even the thickets, but there was no one in sight. The woman in white had vanished without a trace. We were left standing in darkness, our breath visible in the cold air. Doubt and fear gnawed at us as we got back into the car. The drive to the Halloween party was no longer filled with excitement, but with a lingering sense of dread. The strange encounters with the woman in white had cast a long cold shadow over the night, one we couldn't shake. When we finally arrived at the party, our tale of the woman in white was met with skepticism and nervous laughter. But Mark and I knew what we had seen. Our unease was a heavy burden, and every Halloween that followed, we were haunted by the memory of that chilling night.